Welcome to Terra Verde, a weekly environment program co-hosted by Earth Island Journal and KPFA and broadcast on KPFA and KPFB in Berkeley and KFCF in Fresno. Thank you for joining us. I'm Zoe Loftus-Farron, and I'm the host and producer of today's show. Back in 2007, the Supreme Court made a landmark decision. It held that greenhouse gases could be regulated under the Clean Air Act. Following the ruling, the Environmental Protection Agency issued what has become known as the endangerment finding, concluding that six greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, posed a danger to public health and welfare. That finding became the basis for federal climate policy, including the regulation of greenhouse gas emissions from cars, trucks, and power plants. Earlier this year, despite the deepening climate crisis, the Trump administration repealed the endangerment finding. It also rolled back emission standards for vehicles. Dozens of environmental groups, as well as many cities and states, have challenged the repeal. Today, we have two guests involved with one such challenge, known as Venner versus EPA, a youth-led petition based on the constitutional rights to life, liberty, and religious freedom. Elena Venner is the lead petitioner. She's also a fourth-year student at California Polytechnic State University. Julia Olson is the founder, co-executive director, and chief legal counsel of Our Children's Trust, a public interest law firm representing Elena and 17 other young people in the petition. Elena, Julia, welcome to Terra Verde.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
So, Julia, I know I just mentioned some of the basics regarding the endangerment finding, but is there anything that you want to add there as far as the significance of the finding and or the impact of the Trump administration's repeal?
Yeah, I think it's important to put the endangerment finding in context just for people who aren't lawyers to understand that President Nixon actually helped create the EPA back in the early 70s. And at the time, the Congress, the president, people understood that climate change was happening from burning fossil fuels and that carbon dioxide was a primary cause. And they were also concerned about other air pollution, particularly coming out of vehicles. And so the Clean Air Act was instituted and EPA was instituted in order to really control the pollution that industry and cars and manufacturing sectors put out into the air to protect human health and welfare. And so for 17 years now, roughly, the Environmental Protection Agency has said and acknowledged this really important finding that greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide, are heating the planet, they're harming human health, and importantly, they're hurting children the most, including the respiratory systems that kids need to grow, like healthy lungs. And so for the first time ever of any presidential administration since Nixon, the government is now saying, EPA is saying, oh, these are no longer endangering public health and welfare, which is just flat wrong. It ignores the science. And really importantly, they have repealed all of these greenhouse gas emission rules and limits for vehicles that have been protecting the health of children in communities across the country.
Thank you. So can you tell me a little bit about the decision to file this constitutional petition and kind of the thought process behind the claims that you all ended up bringing?
Sure. So Our Children's Trust we're a bit unique in the legal landscape in the United States. We're the only organization that represents children and youth to protect their fundamental rights under the US Constitution and state constitutions to their lives, to their health and safety, and really a livable planet. And this decision to allow unlimited amounts of greenhouse gas pollution from the transportation sector and vehicles specifically is a violation of these young people's fundamental rights. And so we filed suit on behalf of 18 young people, including Elena, from around the country in order to ask the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which hears the case, to stop what EPA is doing and tell EPA that it is violating the constitutional rights of young people. And there are three categories of rights that are at stake. One is the religious freedom of young people that is being harmed as temperatures rise and the air becomes less healthy. Two is really the right to life, which our nation was founded upon, the ability of people to not be endangered by their government is core to the Declaration of Independence and our US Constitution and protected by the Fifth Amendment. And then the third category is really our liberties, which includes young people's right to have bodily integrity and personal security and to defend the health of their bodies against government action that would harm them, and to also benefit from the liberties that their state constitutions provide. So we represent two youth from Hawaii. And the Hawaii government and the Hawaii Constitution say that young people have a right to a climate system that sustains life. They have a right to have their transportation system decarbonized. And the state is committed to that. And EPA's actions threaten those fundamental state rights that are protected under the US Constitution. So those are the core claims in the case.
Thank you. And Elena, of course, you are one of the youth who is a part of this petition. You're the lead petitioner, in fact. I want to dig in a minute into, some of the ways that this decision impacts you. But first, I'm curious if you could share kind of how you became a part of this effort.
Yeah, both my parents have been really involved in climate work their entire lives. So I just think they raised my brother and I to be aware of what was going on and to care a lot about it. And then my brother actually got involved with our Children's Trust because he was in the Juliana versus US case, which was a federal constitutional climate lawsuit that brought 21 young Americans against the government promoting fossil fuel and saying that it violated their rights.
Thank you. And digging in kind of to your experience and I'm curious, could you say kind of a little bit more about how you see this decision impacting you and infringing on your constitutional rights personally?
Yeah, I think personally, I've struggled a lot with some respiratory health issues, especially in the last 4 years. I was diagnosed with exercise-induced asthma when I was young. I still use an inhaler to this day, but I've had a couple sinus surgeries. I had an emergency tonsillectomy and like multiple rounds of antibiotics. And I also while I go to school in California, I live like right by the freeway. And so I think access to clean air is really important, especially with those health issues. Um, and then like on other aspects of it, um, in terms of like the right to liberty and religious freedom, I'm Catholic and I grew up Catholic, and a big part of Catholicism has taught us that the climate is for everyone and it's like a necessary part of human life and the well-being of people. And so when our government isn't actively protecting that, and that foundation for life is now at risk and being harmed.
Thank you. Julia, I know you mentioned the youth in Hawaii and their um, kind of unique rights in that regard, but I'm wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add, particularly about the experiences of any of the other young people that you're representing in this petition.
Yeah, I think, we have often in our cases raised the right to life and bodily integrity and personal security of children and youth who are growing up in unsafe conditions and conditions that their governments are imposing on them with respect to the air they breathe, the increase in wildfire smoke, and really importantly for young people and their developing bodies is the increased heat and the extreme heat days that they're living with. which makes it hard to be outside, hard to exercise, hard to sleep at night, hard to study, right? It impacts young people in so many ways, and it affects their mental health. And one way this has translated, and we've been seeing this for a long time, but this is the first case where we're bringing these claims specifically, is in the burdens on young people and their families' religious practices. And so Elena spoke to this a little bit in terms of her Catholic faith, and I'll just, Elena, to say more what you've described is there's this tension for Elena in terms of protecting life or even bringing life into the world, which her faith calls upon people to do, and having to choose to bring people, a child into the world that's unsafe and unhealthy for that child when you are called to protect life and the planet on which we all live. So there's a real burden there. But there's also a burden to youth of other faiths, including two Jewish boys we represent and a Muslim girl. And heat is really the common theme for these youth. For the Jewish boys, their faith calls them to walk to synagogue on the Sabbath and to practice Shabbat and not to drive. And so there are days now when these young people cannot safely walk to synagogue, something that their parents never experienced growing up. And that heat is increasing. Some also are walking along roads with huge transportation pollution, which also has respiratory effects. And as a young Muslim woman, wearing hijab becomes also more complex as temperatures increase. It becomes more dangerous, and the practice of Ramadan and fasting becomes more dangerous. So we're seeing these decisions by EPA to allow more heat trapping pollution and ozone forming pollution and just more particulate matter pollution affecting young people's religious practices and their ability to be healthy in their bodies. And no one should have to choose between their religious practice and their health and safety.
Right. I want to talk just a little bit more about the fact that you are all young people, Elena, in this petition, and how you see your role in that regard as like a youth plaintiff, a youth petitioner, and someone who, faces a future burden from climate change that perhaps older folks don't in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for as long as I can remember, when I think about my future, climate change has been a part of it. And so, like, when I'm making the considerations for where I want to live, and like, as Julia said, like, if I want to have kids or just like pursue a life, it's just increasingly unstable. And then, like, with the government rolling back um, the Endangerment Finding Act, is just like signaling that they don't really care about our future and our well-being. So that has been disheartening, but I also think like with what our Children's Trust is doing, and that many youth feel this like kind of anxiety about our future and like want to do something about it, there's a lot to do. And that's something I'm really grateful for with getting involved in this community, is finding people that do care and want to make a difference and take some action.
Mhm. Thank you. I'm Zoe Loftus-Farron, and you're tuned in to Terra Verde. Today, we're talking about the Trump administration's repeal of the endangerment finding, which is the basis for federal climate policy here in the United States, and how youth are pushing back. We're here with two guests who are involved with Venner versus EPA, a constitutional petition challenging the repeal. Elena Venner is the lead petitioner and a fourth-year student at California Polytechnic State University. Julia Olson is founder, co-executive director, and chief legal counsel of our Children's Trust, a public interest law firm representing Elena and other young people in the petition. So, Julia, jumping back in, when we spoke earlier this week, you mentioned that at least some actors in the auto industry might have been somewhat opposed to the Trump administration's environmental rollbacks in this in this space. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that and why that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So this decision by EPA to eviscerate the endangerment finding and greenhouse gas emission standards for vehicles was at the direction of the president in executive orders that he issued at the beginning of last year. And EPA carried out those orders not because the science had changed about climate change or because the auto industry couldn't comply with the standards. It did this at the direction of the president in order to prioritize and boost up the fossil fuel based industry and the internal combustion engine vehicle, which uses fuels. And if you're selling gas and diesel fuel, you want more internal combustion engine cars, not less. And when EPA proposed to do this, the auto manufacturers said, we need regulations. We know that the future of vehicles and transportation is in clean vehicles and, primarily electric vehicles. And we want there to be stability and rules across the industry that everyone has to comply with. Like, let's create a level playing field here. And the system that was in place was working. And so there was opposition and people in the industry saying, don't do this, EPA. And I think it's really important to note that around the world, EVs are becoming the dominant vehicle produced and sold. And the United States is falling behind. And it's not beneficial to Ford and GM or any of our major auto manufacturers. And this is harming the EV industry as well, who are doing an incredible job of getting new vehicles out into the market. And EPA is really sabotaging our entire transportation sector. And so I think, when the courts look at this, the equities are really on the side of the youth here, right? I mean, if you can protect constitutional rights and avoid harm to human health and make communities cleaner and safer, and help the auto industry in the United States compete and keep up with what's happening on a global scale, that is beneficial to everybody. And the cost savings are enormous because if we can clean the air, we avoid deaths, we avoid hospital visits, we avoid new cases of asthma in children. It's really for the best of everyone to keep these standards in place and even make them more strict.
So where do things stand right now with the Venner versus EPA petition? What's the latest there?
So there are a lot of petitions challenging this suit, a lot of parties involved. The youth are leading in one respect in terms of asking the Court of Appeals to stay the implementation of the new rule that rescinded the endangerment finding, which means we're basically asking the court to hit the pause button on EPA and tell them that they need to keep the pollution standards in place while the litigation plays out. And again, it's been almost 15 years of having these types of standards that limit greenhouse gas pollution from vehicles that have been getting increasingly stricter. And the industry knows how to comply with them. They can comply with them. And we need to keep those in place while the court hears the case on the merits, because in the end, we believe the court will find that EPA violated the law in numerous ways, including the constitutional rights of the young people.
And Julia, what is the importance really of this stay? Why is it important to pause right now?
Yeah, so when you think about cars, the life of a car or truck is on average about 15 years. And so selling more gas powered cars today means that that car, once it hits the road, someone buys it, it's going to keep polluting for 15 years. And so in looking at EPA's own analysis and data on this, the repeal rule just over the next couple of years in terms of cars that are sold, it's it's going to be a huge amount of additional pollution that results. And our experts say that during the course of the litigation, if the rule is not paused, there will be another gigaton of greenhouse gas pollution that's emitted that traps heat. And when we're talking about carbon dioxide, that pollution stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. It will outlive these young people, and it is irreversible for their lifetimes. Um, and then over the course of through 2050, there's even more. It's almost, I mean, these numbers are huge, but close to 9 gigatons of pollution that will be stopped. So there's just a lot of harm that will happen in the near term as the auto manufacturers produce more internal combustion engine vehicles and fewer electric vehicles. And so that's what we're trying to put a pause on until the court can decide the case on the merits.
Elena, what has it been like being a part of this legal sphere while also, doing your work as a fourth year college student?
Um, at times it's been a little bit challenging, but like I said earlier, like everyone at OCT has just been really kind and very like accommodating for like my schedule. And I also think that something like this is really important, so it's worth it to make like move some things around and balance it um, in order to follow through and work on this as well.
And is this like either, I guess, the endangerment findings specifically or kind of the environmental rollbacks we've been seeing more generally? Is that something that you've seen really capturing the attention and concern of your peers at school?
Yeah, I especially am working in like power and energy at Cal Poly, and I'm working with National Laboratory of the Rockies this summer, formerly National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which the Trump administration also asked them to change their name to not emphasize work on renewables, actually. So I think in that field, a lot of people are really aware about what's going on, and kind of what Julia was saying, there's a lot of like really awesome work that's being done in the technical field with decarbonizing our transportation sector, but also our energy sector. And for the US to like move forward with this, and also still like stay on track with the rest of what the world is doing, it makes a lot of sense to also be prioritizing electrification of the grid as well. So it's kind of works a little bit together. And I think a lot of youth are really aware that like there is this direction that we should be moving forward with. And then our government kind of is moving in the opposite direction. And I think there's some tension there.
Right. And, speaking of that, the government is definitely moving in the other direction, which makes it a pretty hard time to be a climate advocate, do this kind of work. And um, Julia, I know at the same time, our Children's Trust has brought some really landmark cases that have left a mark. And I'd love to hear how you're feeling right now about this petition and the prospects um, of it moving of the stay and just of how it will move forward.
We are really optimistic about this petition and also the motion for stay. We work with incredible young people whose stories deserve to be heard in court, and then the experts that show up donating 100% of their time to provide their expertise and offer up testimony to the court about how dangerous this decision by EPA is and how important it is to stop it. And I think some of the people who are really important to listen to right now are pediatricians. And we have an incredible pediatrician and pediatric psychiatrist who has participated in Elena's case. And I really hope the court reads that, because when people who are charged with who have spent their lives taking care of children and looking out for the health of children are raising the alarm bells and saying, we can't keep doing this. We are damaging children's bodies and minds and their ability to thrive. it should wake everybody up. And that's what's really happening right now. And I think, one reason why we feel really positive and on solid ground in Elena's case is in some of our other cases, like Elena mentioned, Juliana versus United States, the courts have sort of told us in rulings that we want you to bring a narrower case. We want you to focus on, one type of rule or one type of federal action. And that's what this is. We are challenging one rule the EPA has issued and doing it in the traditional way, but bringing the constitutional claims into this case. And I feel confident about our chances that the court is going to really see this and consider it carefully. And I think we should win.
Elena, I'll ask you the same question. How are you feeling at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, Julia touched on it a lot, but I'm very optimistic and hopeful. And I also just think it would establish this great precedent of considering the externalities with like rules like this, and that their impacts do reach pretty far and wide, and that future generations and younger generations should be considered in those decisions.
Before I close this out, Julia, I know, you've mentioned some other federal litigation and you're involved with some other cases. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more broadly about how those cases fit together with our children's trust strategy to bring children a stable climate, essentially.
I think a lot about this right now because we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And there are some people who want, to make that a story about things that I don't think our nation actually stands for. And I think we all need to remember, like, at the time of the Declaration of Independence, what those people were really struggling against was an abuse of power, and power that was depriving them of freedom and life, their ability to practice their religions in their own way, their ability to grow food and feed their families and be healthy and sort of claim a new way of moving forward. And there's a lot we can criticize about that time because there was a lot of inequality that this nation was founded upon. But there was a vision, and it was central to what Thomas Jefferson and others said, that we all are equal and we are created equal and we have unalienable rights. And right now is a time to turn and look at how are we treating children. And so the litigation that we do at our Children's Trust is really centered on trying to put children in the mix of what it means to have these fundamental rights. And they're not just for adults, and they never have been.
Well, thank you both for what you're doing and for joining us today. That is all the time that we have. I want to not only thank Julia and Elena, but also our board operator, Kirsten Thomas, and everyone at KPFA who makes Terra Verde possible. And of course, a big thank you to all our listeners and supporters. Our music is by David Michelle Reddy. You can find Terra Verde and other KPFA programs archived on the KPFA website and also on the Earth Island Journal website as the Earth Island Journal podcast. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and please tune in again next week.
You know, the modern economy is fascinating. You pay to watch TV, you pay to listen to music, you pay to store your photos. I'm not going to name names, but Rod has an app that reminds him to drink water.
Wait.
And we're not judging, we're just saying, if you're going to forget you're paying for something every month, make it KPFA. We'll even let you name the price. You let us know how much KPFA is worth to you. For as little as $5 a month, you can become a monthly sustainer, a guardian of KPFA. Feeling cheeky? Do 10. Feeling generous? Do 50. Since 1949, listeners have kept this place alive by giving what they can. You pick the number. We'll keep the radio on. KPFA.org.
This is 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online everywhere at kpfa.org.